Welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And today I'm with Ross Nichols, the Moses Scroll.
The Moses Scroll, Neil.
So this is an interesting book, and a lot of people like to wonder about, people's credentials when they write books about academic stuff. But there's also experience.
Yeah.
People who have that raw experience, they go to the sites, hands-on stuff. This is your guy for that. This guy's been, how many times have you been here in this?
This is trip 18. Neil.
18, but how many?
Kicking up dust.
But you've had trips here that are 6 months long.
Yeah, I stay several months when I come. Usually if I come, I'm going to make the most of it. I'm going to try to stay 3 months, chase down whatever wild, crazy idea I'm looking at.
Yeah.
Lead tours like we're on together with you guys. And
yeah.
So that's part of it. Digging in the soil, that's what I really like to do.
Right. So when I see that, it's something I take that seriously. People who are hands-on and take that approach. We're talking about the Moses Scroll.
Yeah.
And before we even start, I just want to let people know, we're going to get into the basics on this. If you want to know more about it, the link's in the description where you can buy the book. Tell us a quick little rundown about why you wrote this book.
Okay, excellent question. Let me tell you. So I'm sort of one of those guys, like you said. I don't have a PhD. I started off like so many people, just studying the Bible. I fell in love with the Bible, worked my way out of Christianity, worked my way out of fundamental Christianity. Years ago, I did a class called Following Jesus Out of Christianity, So then I take the next logical step and I turn to the Hebrew Bible. Well, from a fundamentalist standpoint, Neil, I kind of wanted to remain somewhat fundamentalist,
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So I believe that the 66 books of the Bible are inspired, inerrant, the holy, all of that. I mean, that was my view. And then I began studying Hebrew very early, and I just pushed my way through the material. Well, as I moved into the Hebrew Bible, I carried some of that same fundamentalist approach. So now I'm looking at the Tanakh, the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim, and I felt like the real truth is here. But I took that same approach. Well, as I worked through it, I began to really delve into some of the academic works. I know you've worked through a lot of this material too. But what I began to notice, primarily after years of teaching through the Torah cycle of readings, the annual cycle of readings, that go back all the way to Second Temple times, I began to notice some strange things. I began to question whether or not the traditional view that Moses had written the Torah was really valid. Could it stand the test? Traditionally we say that Moses wrote the 5 books. You can't pick up a Bible without seeing the heading Genesis, the first book of Moses, Exodus, the second book of Moses. Well, as I began to read, I started noticing something, and I didn't know this level of detail, but let me tell you, 592 times Moses is mentioned in the Torah, from the time we meet him in Exodus 2 until Deuteronomy 34:12. You take that section, you find Moses 592 times. Why would that trigger me? Because most people writing an account would not use the third person.
Right.
I started noticing things. It describes Moses' death. Well, we know that dead people don't write. So this is not something I discovered. This is something that academics had discovered all through primarily 18th, 19th century, up into Wellhausen and, all of his work. So I began to question whether or not Moses had written any of it. This led me to the discovery, and I'll tell it to you this way. I delivered a class that sort of unveiled this at a conference, a United Israel World Union conference in April of 2019, and this was the title, Finding the Hand of Moses in the Torah. The Torah within our Torah. Now the approach is this, right? You can sense, I know you're going to pick up on this. I still want to believe that Moses did write something, but what was it?
Right.
So I began to notice there are 7 places, and we may get into this more deeply, but I'll tell you just the high end of it. I noticed 7 things that the Pentateuch tells me that Moses wrote. But it's not from Moses' hand, it's from another author. Someone is telling me that Moses wrote something. Classic example, Deuteronomy 31 verse 9, Deuteronomy 31 verse 24 through 26 says, Moses wrote his Torah, gave it to the priest, and the priest put it mitzad ha'aron, beside the ark. So think about that. Moses wrote the Torah, the author of Deuteronomy tells us, and then it says he put it beside the ark. Well, that's somebody telling me Moses wrote the Torah. It's not Moses saying, I wrote the Torah, right? You get the difference.
Yeah, that's...
So the thing that got me was, I said, wait a minute. We still have 3 chapters of Deuteronomy left that, in other words, it can't be talking about Genesis 1:1 through Deuteronomy 34:12. So Neil, I then said, I have to find that book. There's a fundamentalist in me. Is there any trace of that book? For instance, the Torah mentions the book of Jashar in the book of Numbers.
I've always wondered about this.
Right. So
because we have a Jashar, but it's not the right one.
Yeah,
this
you
is
can
like
go
medieval.
on Amazon and get it, but it's not the book. So we have references to these ancient books, these sources that the authors, whoever they were, of the Pentateuch and other books in the Tanakh, we have references to these sources, but we don't have the sources. So my question was, has this book been lost?
Right.
So I set out on a journey, and I discovered that within the book of Deuteronomy, there's a first-person element to Deuteronomy. It's only in Deuteronomy. Now, if you open up Deuteronomy, you read Deuteronomy 1:1 through 5, and it's a narrator speaking. These are the words which Moses spoke on the other side of the Jordan between this place and that place, so forth and so on. And it's all third person. Guess who didn't write it? Moses. But then you begin seeing, now this is only Deuteronomy, Neil. You start seeing places where the writer, let's just be honest, I'm saying it's Moses. Some people would laugh at that. But here's the deal, it's in first person. So you get this feel where it says, and the Lord spoke unto me saying, well, he's talking first person. So that was what I was working on.